All right, everyone, I'm going to show you how to build a small JFET buffer. You could put that buffer in its own enclosure and use it on its own, or put it inside a pre-existing pedal that needs one. The parts needed for the buffer is going to be some strip board like this, a 1 meg resistor, a 3.3K resistor, a 0.1 UF capacitor, a 10 UF capacitor, a BF245 JFET transistor. I have two 6-inch wires, red and black for the power, and two 3-inch wires, green and blue, for the input-output. You can use any color. I'm just going to try to keep that color-coded visually. If you're going to be putting the buffer in an enclosure, you're going to need an enclosure of your choice, 1/4-inch jacks of your choice, and a DC power jack of your choice. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut down our strip board to the size we need. For this JFET buffer, we only need to go 6 across and 6 down, but I'm going to cut this down a little bit smaller so we can work with it easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down the line like that with a razor on both sides and snap that off. Okay, we need to go 6 across, so I'm going to count 7 and mark that row. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm marking the 7th row, and I'm going to cut that with the razor and snap it off. Okay, now I'm going to count 7 this way and mark that off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now we have our 6 by 6 strip board. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark 3 over from the top, and that's going to be one of our cuts. Now to cut the strip board, I like to get a drill bit, place it in the hole, and just turn it by hand until the copper is gone there. And now our trace is cut, and we can start putting our components in. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is get our 1 meg resistor. And when I put it in here, this is going to be where our cut is. We're going to skip 1 hole and put our resistor in there and on the very bottom row. So yours should look like that. Next thing I'm going to do is get our 3.3K resistor. And on the outer row, I'm going to put it second to the top and all the way to the bottom. Yours should look like that. And the next thing we're going to do is get our 10 UF capacitor. When you're looking at an electrolytic capacitor, the long stem is the positive, the short stem is the negative, and the short stem negative is also usually marked by a stripe on the capacitor. Anyways, we're going to put that on the two top rows next to our cut with the stripe negative on top. And it should look like that. Next thing, we're going to get our 0.1 UF capacitor. And we're on the second row, we're going to be putting it right on the third hole down, skip one, and put it in that hole. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, ours should look something like that so far. Next thing we're going to do is get our transistor, and we're going to put that on the second to the last row on the right, on the very top three. And be careful with the orientation. This is what it should look like. If you're using a slightly different JFET transistor, make sure the pin out is DSG, like in the diagram. All right, and yours should look something like that. And that is the entire JFET circuit. All we have to do is add our wires to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get a 6-inch wire, red preferably for power, and I'm going to stick it on the top right corner. Like that. Then I'm going to get our 6-inch black wire for ground, and I'm going to be sticking that on the bottom left corner. So like that. Next thing I'm going to do is get our 3-inch green wire for the input, and I'm going to stick it one hole above the ground, the one we just put in, so it should look something like that. Lastly, we're going to get our blue wire for the output and stick it in the top left corner like that. All right, now we have our completed JFET circuit. If you're going to be putting this in a pedal, it's pretty explanatory. Your input jack goes to the green input. The output jack goes to the blue output. And red power, black negative. All right, I'm going to install the buffer into an enclosure. Yours will probably look different depending on what enclosure you use, the type of 1/4-inch jacks you use, and also the DC power jack. I currently have a wire jumping across the two grounds, so the ground goes straight through on the input-output jacks. The first thing I'm going to do is get our green wire, which is our input for the buffer, and I'm going to solder it onto the input tip. All right, yours should look something like that. The next thing I'm going to do is get our ground wire and solder it to ground on one of the jacks. All right, yours should look something like that. Our ground wire touching the ground on our jacks. Then I'm going to get our blue output wire and solder it to the output tip. All right, yours should look something like that. Our output blue wire is attached to the output tip. Next thing I'm going to do is get another jumper wire and attach it to ground, and we're going to put that on our DC jack. Now, traditionally, guitar pedals are wired with a center pin negative, so we're going to find the center pin and put our jumper from the ground on our jacks to the center pin of the DC jack. Okay, ours should look something like that. We have a wire going from the ground on our input output jacks to the center pin of our DC jack. Lastly, we're going to get our power cable and solder it to the outer sleeve of our power jack. All right, yours should look something like that. Now we have a JFET buffer in enclosure of your choice, and let's hear what that sounds like.